Have you ever imagined losing your job on the very day your son was born? When the world should be welcoming you as a father, it snatches away the one thing you need to protect your family. This is the story of a man who hit rock bottom and quietly found his way back up. I remember that morning clearly, like it was yesterday. The sky was gray, clouds hanging low as if holding back some kind of rain. The damp air clung to my skin, feeling chilly, even though it was still midsummer, June. Laura sat beside me in the car, hands cradling her belly, her face tightening each time a contraction drew nearer. She didn't moan, didn't complain, just gave my hand a gentle squeeze and closed her eyes. I knew she was enduring. She was always strong like that. I drove to the hospital in silence. No music played from the radio. It was just us, and the sound of our son's heartbeat inside his mother. I didn't know then that another sound was about to shatter everything I had. We arrived at the hospital a little after 8 a.m. Things moved pretty quickly. Nurses took Laura to a labor room, and I was asked to fill out registration forms, provide insurance info, sign administrative papers. I was used to it. First-time fatherhood always came with a pile of documents, as if life needed a certificate just to be allowed to exist. I hadn't eaten breakfast, but I wasn't hungry. My mind held only one image: my son's face, which I hadn't seen yet. I wondered whose eyes he'd have, whose lips, and whether he'd be a quiet boy like me, or laugh boisterously like his grandfather used to every Sunday morning. I had just sat down on a chair in the hallway to catch my breath when my phone rang. The vibration in my pocket buzzed like a timer ticking down. I pulled it out. A call from work. Took me a few seconds to register. I wasn't going to answer. Today was the day my son was being born. But then I saw the caller ID, Richard Holt, my boss. I answered. His voice was even, polite, but colder than the hospital air conditioning humming above me. He told me to come to the office for a bit, something important he needed to discuss privately. I hesitated, repeated, "I'm at the hospital. My wife's in labor." But he just said one thing, "It won't take long." Right then, I had a bad feeling, but I couldn't refuse. I knew Holt. When he said important, it meant it was going to change someone's life. I just didn't know that day that someone would be me. I went back into the delivery room, told Laura quietly that I needed to step out for a bit, just an hour. She looked at me, worried, but still nodded. "Make sure you're back before I start pushing." She managed a small smile, reassuring me. Even though she was the one who needed reassurance most, I left the hospital, drove straight to the office. The familiar streets suddenly felt foreign, as if every signpost was leading me astray. Red lights seemed longer than usual. Traffic seemed thicker. My heart beat faster than usual. Mr. Holt's office was on the 5th floor. Glass door, blinds half drawn, the overhead fluorescent lights as cold as ever. He was already sitting there, coffee still steaming. Someone else was in the room, Jared, the young engineer who joined just over a year ago. He wasn't sitting but leaning by the window, his back turned to me. Before I could ask anything, Holt motioned for me to sit down. He started with the familiar words, the kind like, "We appreciate your contributions, Daniel," or, "You've always been dedicated." Then came the classic line, "But due to financial reasons, we're forced to restructure." I sat there, numb. I didn't yell, didn't curse. I just asked one question, my voice trembling slightly, "Why me?" Holt took a breath, tilted his head towards Jared. "He has a fresh perspective. We need people who can push the company towards digitalization faster." Jared's young, flexible, connected, and, well, you understand, Daniel. I didn't understand. I looked him straight in the eye. My eyes weren't red, but my heart felt like it was bleeding inside my chest. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. No one was on my side in that room. Nobody asked, "Isn't your wife about to give birth?" I nodded, said nothing more. I stood up, pulled out my phone. 13 missed calls from Laura. My throat tightened. I turned and walked out. Jared still didn't look at me. Holt turned away. I heard the door click shut behind me, like the sound of a page being torn out of a book, one nobody wanted to read again. It was 11:15. I remember because the hospital hallway clock was flashing the time when I got back. I ran like crazy through the corridors. A nurse called out to me, "Are you Laura's husband?" "She's delivering." I nodded, too breathless to speak. I walked into the delivery room just as my son's voice broke through his first cry. Ethan was born. I looked at my son. So red, tiny mouth wide open, little hands waving as if searching for an anchor in this vast world. And I couldn't hold him right away. I stood at the foot of the bed, my hands still shaking. Laura smiled, asked why I was sweating so much. I said I'd rushed. I couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't let her know I just lost my job as our child entered the world. I held him in my arms. The smell of newborn skin, warm and sweet. But my chest ached not with joy, but because, for the first time in my life, I felt so utterly powerless. I was this boy's father, the one who was supposed to have everything ready for him, the one who would protect him from the shocks, the storms. And yet, I was the one being cast out without a warning, without a chance. I held my son tighter. Ethan kept crying, but I didn't. I was grown up. I didn't cry like a child anymore, but inside, I was screaming. I don't remember how long I sat there at the foot of the hospital bed. Maybe it was just a few minutes, maybe it was an hour. Time, it lost all meaning right then. My mind was blank. The delivery room was stark white, the faint smell of antiseptic stinging my nose, mingling with the steady beep of the monitor. But inside me, chaos. Laura lay there, exhausted, but her face radiated a contentment I'd never seen before. She had just gone through the kind of pain that tears the body apart to bring a life into this world. Yet, when she saw me walk in, her eyes lit up as if all that pain had vanished. She took my hand, her voice a whisper, weak but strangely warm. "We have a son, Daniel, a healthy baby boy, and stubborn like his dad." I smiled. It took everything I had not to break down right then. But my heart was a tangled mess. I looked at Ethan, wrapped in a white blanket, nestled in his mother's arms. His tiny face, red and wrinkled like a little old man, yet breathtakingly beautiful. A nurse came over, gently asked if I wanted to hold him. I nodded. Just that simple gesture, yet my hands trembled so much I had to take a deep breath before reaching out. Ethan was placed in my arms, light as a thin jacket, yet heavy as the entire world pressing down on my shoulders. I looked at my son, and I saw everything I'd never seen before. I saw the future. I saw responsibility. I saw fear swelling like a bubble about to burst. I saw I wasn't ready. I saw I wasn't enough. Ethan opened his eyes. They were hazy, unfocused, but I swear in that moment, I felt him look right at me.
No judgment. No expectation.
Just a presence, as if he was saying, "I'm here, Dad," and I cried, not out loud, not shaking. Tears just flowed, hot against my skin. I leaned down, rested my forehead against Ethan's, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I don't know what to do anymore." Laura didn't hear. She had drifted off to sleep. The exhaustion after childbirth pulled her into a wordless dream. But I was wide awake, more awake than I'd ever been. I sat like that for a long time, holding my son. The room grew quiet. Sunlight slanted through the thin blinds, casting pale streaks on the gray-tiled floor. There were footsteps of nurses passing by, the soft roll of cart wheels, the gentle click of a door closing down the hall. But inside me, only one sound remained. My heartbeat and Ethan's steady breathing. I tried to picture tomorrow. What would I tell Laura when she asked about work? Where would the money come from for the hospital bill? How much did I have left in my account? How much time did I have before everything collapsed? I wondered if I could really be a father. Not the father in perfect social media pictures, but a real man, the kind who gets up early for work, quietly pays the electric bill, comes home after dark, and still has enough patience left to rock his child to sleep. But how could I start when I'd just been thrown out of my company without a word? How could I keep this roof over our heads when they just replaced me with some kid fresh out of college simply because he had connections? I looked at Ethan. He was still asleep. His mouth pursed slightly, his hand curled as if gripping something tight. And I realized, even though he was just a few hours old, he'd already taught me something. That when you have nothing left in your hands, you can still give everything with your heart. I can't fully explain what I felt then. Just a strange feeling, as if the universe was telling me, start over, Daniel, from this child, from those eyes. The door opened. A nurse came in, gave me a slight nod, and said it was time to take the baby for his newborn checks. I hesitated. I didn't want to let him go, but I had to place Ethan in the bassinet. Before the nurse wheeled him away, I leaned down and kissed his forehead one more time. His skin felt cool, soft as cotton. And this time I said it clearer. Dad won't give up. Don't worry. I went back to the chair, sat beside Laura. She was still sleeping. Her hair fell across her cheek. Her lips curved in a faint smile. Despite her exhaustion, her face looked strangely peaceful. I took her hand gently. Her fingers were so much smaller than mine, but they were where I'd found strength for years. She had no idea what had happened to me that morning. I couldn't bring myself to wake her with that truth. I knew I had to tell her. Soon. But not now. Right now, she needed sleep. Needed to recover. Needed to know our son was safe, and I was still here. In that quiet moment, I felt lost. Caught between the joy of being a father and the fear of being cast out by society. Between the first embrace and the silent dismissal. Joy had never looked so much like fear, but because of that, it felt more real than ever before. Ethan was a gift, but no one ever said that holding on to that gift would cost me everything. I closed my eyes, tried to rest for a moment, but my mind wouldn't stop. It kept running, like an old film reel rewinding, replaying everything I'd done, sacrificed, and still been discarded for. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew, right then, I couldn't let myself fall apart. Not for me, for Ethan, for Laura, because this was my family, and I wouldn't let anyone take it from me again. I started working again just 3 days after Ethan was born. Not at the old office, not with process diagrams or engineering blueprints, but manual labor jobs, simple, backbreaking work that paid cash at the end of the day. I didn't have time to be sad, nor anyone to pour my heart out to. It was as if, from the moment I held my son in that delivery room, I'd made a silent pact with myself. From now on, I couldn't afford to be weak. In the mornings, I worked in the stockroom of a supermarket 10 minutes walk from home. The job wasn't complicated. Stacking goods, checking inventory, pushing pallet jacks from the loading dock to the warehouse. My hands swelled up after 3 days and used to the lifting. Once, I crushed a finger in a metal door, blood oozing out. I didn't stop, just stuffed a paper towel around it and kept loading boxes. In the afternoons, I switched to being a driver for a building supply store. I drove a small truck, delivering bags of cement and lime to construction sites around the city. The smell of dust clung to my clothes until late evening, so much so that Laura started hanging my work clothes separately on the balcony, afraid the smell would get into the baby's room. Come evening, I changed uniforms again, delivering fast food for a new app that had just launched. At first, I felt ashamed wearing the insulated delivery bag on my shoulder, knocking on doors, hearing the doorbell chime and thank yous through intercoms. But I got used to it, even got used to the sound of doors closing quickly behind me after the food was handed over, before anyone really saw the delivery guy's face. I worked 3 jobs every day, from 8 a.m. until nearly 11 p.m. No days off, no complaints. There was only one driving force, Ethan. That little boy, still so tiny and red, had become the center of every decision I made. I taped his picture inside my wallet, so every time I opened it to count tips or my daily wage, I remembered who I was doing it for. Every night when I got home, I'd quietly stand by his crib, watching him sleep, listening to his soft breaths, seeing his little belly rise and fall with each steady rhythm. Some nights, I'd just sit on the floor, lean my back against the wall, and fall asleep right there with the delivery bag still slung over my shoulder. Laura didn't ask too many questions. She knew I was hiding something. She noticed it in the way I'd stare into the distance whenever she talked about giving Ethan my middle name or her father's. She didn't push me to talk, but I knew she was carrying the weight with me in her own way. I'd catch her diligently sewing little fabric keychains, then posting them for sale online. I saw her meticulously tracking every expense, taping discount coupons to the fridge. Once, I almost apologized for making her live so frugally, but then I stopped myself. Because the look in her eyes when she gazed at our son, still warm, still bright, made it seem like everything was worth it. I remember one evening, a steady rain was falling, and I was delivering food to a fourth-floor apartment with no elevator. I climbed each step of the slippery metal staircase, sweat mixing with rainwater running down my back. When I got there, the customer took the food, then closed the door without a word of thanks. I stood there for a few seconds, tired, sore, but not angry. Walking back down the stairs, I stopped between the third and second floors. My hand gripped the railing, my head hung low, couldn't catch my breath. My back screamed in pain. My arms felt like lead, but I had to keep going. Because morning meant the stockroom shift at 8 a.m. There were moments I thought, what if I just collapsed somewhere? Who would find me first? A coworker at the warehouse? An irritated customer whose order was late? Or Laura? That thought scared me. Not the fear of dying, but the fear that no one would ever know how hard I had tried. One time, while waiting tables at a small diner late at night, I ran into Vince, the night manager. He wasn't mean, just strict and impatient. The place was packed that night. I was running tables constantly, carrying hot trays, wiping down surfaces, refilling water glasses. But being new to the rhythm, I dropped a plate. The shattering sound echoed through the dining room, feeling like it stripped me bare in front of everyone. Vince stared at me from across the room. I knew that look. It was the exact same look Holt had given me the day I was fired. A look of distrust, no patience, no need for explanation. "Daniel," Vince yelled out, "this isn't a playground for you to practice being a grown-up. If you can't handle it, leave." The entire diner turned to look. I stood there, my hands still damp. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. I bent down, picked up the broken pieces, wiped the floor clean, then went back to work, because I couldn't stop. A man can bleed, he can be bruised. But if he stops, who stands between the world and his wife and child? I got home close to midnight that day. Laura was rocking Ethan to sleep. She looked up at me, started to say something, but then fell silent. I sat down beside the crib, looking at my son. Ethan stirred slightly, then turned his face inward. Maybe he sensed his father's presence. Or maybe it was just the breeze. I touched his finger, tiny like a piece of straw. But that finger was hooked tight around my heart, refusing to let go. I whispered, "Dad's sorry he's not good enough. But I won't stop, Ethan. Even if I have to work 100 more jobs, Dad won't give up." And I knew this wasn't like the old promises I might have broken in years past. This was a beginning of a father choosing to stand up on bare feet and unbreakable faith. I still remember that evening, like a cold knife twisting slowly, deeply into my self-respect. The diner where I worked the night shift was on a main street corner, its red and yellow neon sign blinking erratically, as if constantly warning that something was about to break. Every time I walked past the large front window, I saw my reflection. Worn-out uniform, slumped shoulders, hurried steps. No longer the lead engineer, no more crisp white shirts. Just a man trying desperately not to collapse in the city he once thought was his. That night, the place was packed. I heard the clatter of silverware on plates, the buzz of cheerful conversation, the hiss and grind of the espresso machine at the bar. All the sounds blended together, forming a wave that pressed down on my ears, my shoulders, my every step. I served table 8, then 12, then headed back to the counter to pick up an order for 15. Sweat soaked the back of my shirt. My hands trembled slightly as I balanced a tray with 3 water glasses and 2 steaming plates of spaghetti. My shoes were a bit slippery. The soles had worn down months ago, but I couldn't afford to replace them. I needed every dollar for Ethan, and then it happened. I slipped turning the corner near the entrance. Didn't fall completely, but the tray tilted. 1 water glass tumbled off, splashing onto the handbag of a woman sitting at a nearby table. The glass shattered, ice scattering across the floor. A moment of silence stretched out, feeling like an eternity. I bent down, apologizing profusely, my hands shaking as I picked up the shards. The woman shrieked, "That's a designer bag. Do you have any idea how much this costs?" I kept my head down, still apologizing. But in my mind was Vince's voice, the night manager, booming behind me like thunder in a clear sky. "Daniel, what the hell are you doing? This is a restaurant, not a playground for teenagers." I turned. Vince stood there, face flushed red, finger pointing straight at me. His eyes filled with contempt. Some customers started staring. A middle-aged man shook his head with a smirk. I heard someone mutter behind me, "Probably just got out of jail. Looks like he doesn't know how to work." I opened my mouth to say something. Maybe an explanation. Maybe just another apology. But my throat closed up. Not out of fear, but because I knew nothing I said would change anything. They didn't care who I was. They didn't need to know what I used to do. They just saw a tired-looking, middle-aged guy who broke a glass and spilled water on someone's expensive bag. That was it. I continued picking up the broken pieces. Silently, I wiped the floor with the smallest rag I could find at the service station. My hand got cut. Blood seeped from a fingertip, but I didn't feel the pain. Maybe the physical hurt had given way to something else, something like shame, but deeper. After cleaning up, I headed back towards the kitchen. Vince followed, pulling me into a hidden corner. He spoke quietly now, his voice less harsh but still cold. "You're not cut out for this, Daniel. You're not fast enough, not agile. I'll give you 1 more week. If you don't improve, I'll have to let you go." I nodded. No reaction. I didn't have the energy to be angry anymore. I also didn't have any other options. That night, I got home close to 1 a.m. The small apartment was dark. Laura was asleep, but the nightlight in Ethan's room was still on. I peeked in, saw him lying on his side, hand clutching the edge of his blanket. I sat down on the chair by the crib. Taking off my shoes felt like shedding the entire painful day from my body. I didn't sleep right away. I opened my wallet, took out Ethan's picture. A quick print from the photo shop nearby. In the photo, he was smiling. A carefree smile that hadn't yet known the bitterness his father was enduring. I looked at that smile and asked myself, if you saw Dad being humiliated like this, would you be ashamed? The answer came softly, like a breath. No, you wouldn't be ashamed. Because Dad didn't run away. I folded the picture, put it back in my wallet, then stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was cold, but I stood there for a long time. I looked out into the distance, where the tall buildings still glowed with lights, and told myself, tomorrow, I'll go back to that diner. I'll carry the trays steadier. I won't spill anything. I'll work until they stop looking down on me, because if I gave up today, then Ethan would grow up with a father who broke because of a contemptuous look. And I couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not when my son's life had just begun. It was a Friday night. I remember clearly because Ethan had just turned 2 months old. Laura had made a tiny oatmeal cake shaped like a bare face, giggling as she nursed him, whispering, "We've kept this little guy alive for 2 months, Daniel." I smiled along, but my heart didn't. I had exactly $36 left in my wallet. I didn't say anything, just picked up my phone, turned on the delivery app, and immediately accepted the next order. The rain started as I left the house. Not a downpour, but that persistent kind of drizzle, each drop heavy, clinging to my jacket, refusing to let go. The streets gleamed under the mixture of headlights and water, reflecting shimmering halos like scattered, confused memories. I headed towards the pizza place. It was already close to 9:30. I picked up the order, 2 large pizzas and a bottle of soda. The address was a house at the end of a residential street in the suburbs, a 15-minute ride away. I wasn't wearing a raincoat. I also hadn't noticed how worn the soles of my shoes had become. All I knew was if I delivered late, I might lose my bonus. I drove through the rain, droplets hitting my face like tiny needles. Turning into the narrow lane leading to the house at the end, the streetlights were dim. I had to strain my eyes to make out the house number. I parked the bike, grabbed the pizza boxes, and ran across the front lawn, slippery and waterlogged. Less than 5 steps from the front door, I heard a faint schlick. My shoe slipped on a paving stone. My body lurched, and then I fell. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. I clearly felt the cold rainwater soaking through my jacket back, the plastic soda bottle flying from my grasp, the pizza boxes flipping open, hot cheese and toppings splattering onto the wet lawn. My left arm hit the ground, sending a jolt of pain up my shoulder. My knees burned, but that physical pain was nothing compared to what was boiling up inside me. I lay there, in a stranger's yard, rain hitting my face, hands scraped, pizza ruined. And I could only think one thing: I can't do this anymore. I struggled to sit up. My trembling hands reached for the box that was mostly intact. A young woman opened the door, looking at me with concern. She asked if I was okay. I just nodded. She took the torn pizza box, looking at it uncertainly. I took a breath and said, "I'm sorry. I'll go back and get another order." She hesitated for a second, then nodded. Didn't ask anything else. Didn't seem angry, but her eyes, I couldn't stand that look. Not pity, not contempt, just a look as if I were invisible, as if I didn't really exist. I went back to the bike, sat there in the rain for almost 5 minutes, unable to even start the engine. Water seeped through my pants, my sleeves, ran down my spine, but I didn't bother wiping it away. I lowered my head, gripped the handlebars, and for the first time since the day I was fired, I said it out loud, "God, I can't take any more." I didn't yell. I whispered. The rain drowned out my voice, but I knew God heard, because in that moment, every facade I tried to maintain, the toughness, the composure, the "I'm okay" shell, melted away like the cheese on the pizza I just dropped. I got home at 10:30, clothes soaked, knees scraped raw, hand bruised purple. Laura was asleep, the light in the room just a dim yellow glow. I quietly went into the bathroom, changed, bandaged my wounds with Ethan's cartoon band-aids. Not a sound. Afterward, I stepped out onto the balcony. The rain had eased. The air was cold, the breeze carrying the damp smell of earth and wet leaves. I leaned against the iron railing, looking down at the empty street. The streetlights blurred in my vision. I didn't know if it was rain or tears, maybe both, and I suddenly felt small, like a speck of dust drifting in the night, unknown to anyone. A 38-year-old man, who once had a position, a future, now delivering pizza and falling flat on his face in someone else's yard. I asked myself, is this fate or just punishment? I didn't have an answer, but I had an image. Ethan, sleeping in the next room, his breathing steady, the sleep of a child who didn't yet know how unfair life could be. And I was still here not because I was strong, but because I couldn't let that little boy grow up without a father resilient enough to get back up after a fall. I lifted my head, looked up at the murky night sky, and I swore to myself, tomorrow, I'll still deliver, but not just for the money, but because I'm not done fighting this. That night, after cleaning up, I quietly changed into an old sweater and left the apartment. Laura was asleep, Ethan too. The place was submerged in quiet, only the ticking clock reminding me that time kept moving, whether I stood still or fell down. I don't know why I went for a walk. Instinct just pushed me out of those four walls, at least for tonight. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet. Pale yellow light from the street lamps reflected in puddles, shimmering like broken mirror fragments. The cold wind cut through my clothes, but I didn't feel cold. Just a hollow ache in my chest, a bottomless void I couldn't fill. I just walked, no destination in mind. Past quiet streets, houses shuttered and silent, front yards scattered with fallen leaves. The city at night felt like a giant body breathing slowly, deeply in its sleep, leaving me adrift amidst those breaths. I didn't intend to go to the church, but my feet led me there. The church was about a 20-minute walk from my place. A small, simple church, with a red brick facade and a white cross standing tall in the front yard. I'd attended services here a few times as a kid. My father was the one who taught me how to pray. He wasn't preachy, but he believed that sometimes, when there was no one left to talk to, God was still there. I remember whenever our family faced hard times, my father never yelled or broke things. He'd just quietly go to the church, sit alone on a wooden pew, head bowed low, as if whispering to someone only he could hear. Tonight I did the same, but when I arrived, the heavy wooden doors were locked tight. No light seeped from within. Only the shadow of the cross stretched long across the damp concrete. I walked up the steps, my wet shoes making tiny squeaks with each footfall. I sat down on the bottom step, hands braced behind me, head tilted up towards the cross. A fine mist still lingered in the air, tiny droplets landing on my face, soft as the breath of someone unseen. I sighed, a sigh no one heard, a sigh that held everything I hadn't been able to name for months. I didn't know where to start, didn't know how to pray the right way. I just opened my mouth, softly, as if talking to myself. God, I know, maybe I'm not your best son. I don't read the Bible every night. I don't always go to service. I don't ask for your blessing every time I need something. I paused. The wind whispered over the church roof, a low moan like someone sobbing softly in the distance. I continued, my voice quieter, but I never stopped believing in you. Even when I lost my job. Even when I was kneeling in the rain, holding ruined pizza, blood on my knees. I still believed that there was some reason for all of this. I closed my eyes. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw Ethan's face, saw his gummy smile, saw Laura's eyes, reflecting a steadfast belief I no longer saw in myself. I opened my eyes, looked straight at the cross. But I'm tired, God, I whispered. So tired. I don't know how much longer I can keep going. If this is your test for me, then I'm sorry. I'm not sure I can pass. A drop of water, or maybe a tear, I couldn't tell, landed on my hand resting on my knee. I didn't sob. I didn't scream. I just sat there, letting the weakness seep into every muscle, every vein, every beat of my heart. No resistance.
No hiding.
I thought about my father, about the time he lost his job at the factory, and still put on a tie every day to look for a new one, as if holding on to something he refused to let go. I thought about the days he took me to this church, sitting in the third pew from the back, so silent I could hear my own heart drumming in my chest. He never prayed out loud. He just sat there. And when we left, he always said, "Son, sometimes silence is the strongest prayer." Tonight, I chose silence too. I didn't ask God for a job. I didn't ask him for lottery winnings or a lucky break. I just asked him for one reason to get up tomorrow morning. A reason strong enough to keep me walking, even when my legs felt like giving out. In that moment, I didn't feel cold anymore. The wind still blew, the mist still fell. But inside me, there was a faint warmth, tiny, just beginning to bloom, like a minuscule seedling pushing up through barren ground. I sat there a while longer, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. Then I stood up, brushed the dampness from my pants, though they were already soaked, and bowed my head to the cross one last time.
No promises.
No grand wishes, just a silent whisper in my heart. I won't give up, God. Even if I have to crawl instead of walk. I turned, walked away. The night was still long. The road home was still far. But for the first time in months, I felt I wasn't alone on that road, because even though the church doors were closed, the door of faith inside me had opened. The next morning, I woke before the sun had fully pierced the curtains. The room was still dim gray, the air cool, and I lay there, unsure if I had truly slept or just paused the thoughts from the night before. My shoulders still felt heavy, limbs weary, but something inside me had shifted, however slightly. Like when you know you've hit bottom, everything after that can only be upward. I sat up, moved slowly out of the room, careful not to wake Laura. She slept on her side, one hand resting on a small pillow as if holding something precious. Her hair was lightly tousled across her forehead, her face still showing traces of fatigue. I watched her for a moment, then left without a sound. The apartment always had a strange quietness in the early morning. Not like the night, where silence carried worry, but the stillness of hope, of something quietly regenerating. I poured myself a glass of water, then walked towards Ethan's room. The door creaked open softly. Early light flooded in through the thin, pale blue curtain, bathing the room in a soft haze. Ethan was lying on his back in the crib, arms and legs waving gently, making faint gurgling sounds as if chatting with the sunbeams. I approached slowly, bending down carefully, not wanting to startle him. And then his eyes opened. He looked right at me. I didn't speak. I didn't smile. I just stood still, letting that gaze lock onto mine like an invisible thread, pulling me back from the darkest corner of my soul to solid ground. Those eyes so clear, untainted by any judgment. Not asking how much money I'd made. Not asking if I was tired. Not needing to know how long I'd sat alone outside the church last night. Those eyes just looked as if I were his whole world, however battered, however broken. And suddenly, Ethan smiled, a gummy, toothless, drool-covered smile, but so beautiful it felt like the entire world stopped for that 1 second. I leaned down, gently touched his tummy, and he laughed louder, waving his arms as if beckoning me closer. I laughed with him, but tears welled up at the same time. Not fiercely, just drop by drop, slowly, like a crack spreading across ice that had been frozen solid for months. I pulled the small chair over to the crib, sat down, and just looked at him for a long time. I spoke to him as if he understood everything. Dad used to think he wasn't good enough, Ethan. That Dad was a failure. That you'd grow up and be ashamed to have a father like me. But then, just your eyes. You make me remember. I'm still human. Ethan blinked, then waved his arms as if agreeing. I chuckled softly, then continued. Dad doesn't promise to be some huge success. Dad doesn't promise to be rich or famous. But Dad promises he won't give up. Whatever tomorrow brings, Dad will still get up early, still go to work, still bring home every dollar. For you. For your mom. For this little family. Soft footsteps sounded behind me. I turned to see Laura standing in the doorway, holding a mug of tea, hair still messy, but her eyes were bright. She didn't say anything, just looked at me, then at Ethan. And her smile was something I hadn't seen in so long. Laura walked in, sat down beside me, placed her hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. I looked up at her, and she just said one sentence, "You're still here, and that's enough." I nodded, then gently touched my forehead to Ethan's. The baby smiled again. In that moment, I realized I didn't need anyone but the three of us. Didn't need my old boss, didn't need validation from the world. Just these two people and the faith I'd rediscovered last night. Ethan closed his eyes, drifting back to sleep amidst the rising sunlight. The room felt warmer, not because of the temperature, but because something inside me had softened. A thin layer of ice melted, a wound healing from within. I stood up, kissed Laura lightly on the forehead, then checked the clock. 7:30. I put on my jacket, laced up my shoes, ready to go out. But this time it wasn't driven by fear or panic. It was because I remembered why I started. Laura called after me. "I'll make that dish you like tonight. Honey glazed chicken." I smiled back. "Just don't burn it like last time." She pretended to glare, and I walked out the door with the first genuine smile I'd worn in weeks. And I knew I would be okay, because when you see your child's eyes, and in them, complete trust, nothing on earth can keep you pinned to the bottom forever. The world might turn its back, but your child won't. And sometimes that's all a man needs to stand up again. One thing I realized after those months of backbreaking work: not all doors stay closed forever. Some are just waiting for the right person to knock. And sometimes you don't need to pound hard. You just need to be the one who understands how the hinges work. I kept delivering food, kept working in the warehouse, kept washing cars. But after that night at the church, after Ethan's gaze, after Laura's unspoken nod, I wasn't working out of fear anymore. I was working because I had chosen to stand up. And that changed everything. I remember the day clearly, a Tuesday afternoon, the sky crystal clear after days of drizzle. I had a delivery for a small logistics company in the industrial park on the east side. The name wasn't prominent, but I recognized it from job apps where they were listed as expanding. I arrived around quitting time, employees were packing up, but the office lights were still on. I was delivering 2 pizzas and a salad, but when I got to the reception desk, the receptionist was flustered. The person who ordered forgot to note the floor, and the whole company had just migrated servers. The internal network was glitching, preventing anyone from accessing the order system. I stood there waiting. Staff members were busy making calls. No one came down to get the food. Everyone was occupied. I don't know what prompted me to step closer to the computer they were struggling with, but I looked at the software interface and saw a very familiar error. A line flashing red at the bottom corner. "Looping packet detected." I tilted my head, looked closer. It was exactly the kind of glitch I used to help the IT team troubleshoot at my old company, caused by a piece of legacy code that hadn't been updated in the communication system between the warehouse and the route dispatch for drivers. I said quietly, "I think I know this error." The technician, Sarah, I learned her name later, looked at me like she couldn't believe her ears. "You deliver pizza and you know back-end software?" she asked, half smiling, half skeptical. I just nodded, then quickly explained the principle of the internal signal packets and how to bypass it temporarily with a small script, just to process incoming orders until the main systems engineer returned. Sarah didn't say anything. She just nodded, followed my instructions, and the system came back online within 2 minutes. No one spoke. Just a soft "oh" escaped from her. I delivered the food and turned to leave, like always. But this time, before I reached the elevator, Sarah ran after me. "Were you an engineer?" she asked, her heart still racing as if she'd just run a sprint. I smiled. "Used to be. Now I deliver pizza." She was silent for a few seconds, then asked if I'd be interested in getting back into the field. I looked at her, didn't answer right away. Part of me was used to not expecting anything from anyone anymore. But her eyes weren't asking just to be polite. She seemed genuinely interested. "I could introduce you to our head of logistics. They're looking for an operations coordinator who understands systems and has practical experience. They don't need fancy degrees, just someone who knows the work." I don't remember exactly when I nodded, but that evening, when I got home, I told Laura everything. She was quiet for a moment, then took my hand. "I always believed, eventually, people would see who you are." A week later, I went for the interview. No pressed shirt, no tie. I wore the same jacket I'd fallen in while wearing in the rain. The scar on my hand had faded, but it wasn't gone. And I didn't try to hide it. The interview wasn't long. They asked me about solutions for optimizing logistics processes during manpower shortages. I gave real examples about how I managed to deliver over 30 orders alone each night without mixing up addresses. I talked about troubleshooting a system when no one else knew what was happening. I spoke the language of someone who had actually lived through it, not buzzwords from a resume, but the story of someone who'd been in the trenches. When they asked, "Why do you want to come back to the industry now?" I looked them straight in the eye and answered, "I never left. I was just waiting for the right place where I was truly needed." 3 days later, I got the call. They wanted to offer me the position of lead dispatch coordinator, starting the following week. I didn't laugh out loud. I didn't shout. I just held the phone, stepped out onto the balcony, looked up at the sky, and whispered 2 words, "Thank you." That night, Laura made honey-glazed chicken. Ethan sat in his high chair, banging a plastic spoon on the tray, grinning widely. I looked at him, then turned to my wife and said, "I'm not sure I've succeeded, but I know one thing for sure. I didn't break." She didn't say anything, just nodded gently, and her eyes, for the first time in months, were free from worry. I don't think this opportunity came from luck. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. I believe that when you keep putting one foot in front of the other, even when no one is watching, even when no one pats you on the back, eventually your knowledge, your character, and your resilience will speak for themselves. An opportunity will come, not like a gift, but like an answer. The auditorium was colder than I expected that day. An annual conference for logistics companies in the region, the kind of event I used to dream of just getting a ticket to attend. And now, I was standing on the main stage, preparing to present a session on optimizing supply chain operations under manpower constraints. My name was printed on the badge clipped to my chest. Daniel Miller, lead coordinator. Bold, neat letters. Nothing fancy, not elaborate, but to me it represented an entire journey. I stood backstage watching the rows of seats fill up. The house lights dimmed then brightened in sections. Soft chimes signaling the start echoed from the speakers. People rustled, put away phones, adjusted their materials, sitting attentively like a large classroom. A stagehand brought me a glass of water. I thanked him with a small smile. My hand holding the glass wasn't shaking, but my heart definitely was. I wasn't worried about the presentation. I knew every number, every case study I would mention. I understood this system like the back of my hand because I had driven the trucks in the rain, delivered the boxes when the system failed. I wasn't here to put on a show. I was here to tell a story, and if someone understood it, great. If not, that was okay too. But as I glanced down at the guest seating, I saw him, Richard Holt, sitting in the back row, near an emergency exit. He wore a light gray suit, no tie. His hair was much grayer now. He looked smaller. The polished veneer from our last meeting in his office was gone. Just an older man, thinner, sitting quietly in the crowd. But I recognized him instantly. Maybe he recognized me too, because the moment our eyes met, I saw him freeze. Then he looked down as if adjusting his glasses. I didn't know if he was there out of curiosity, or if he needed ideas, or if it was just a coincidence. I didn't need to know either. I just knew. I didn't feel angry anymore. When it was my turn to go on stage, the lights shifted to a warm spotlight where I stood. The auditorium gradually fell silent. I took a deep breath and began. I didn't start with statistics. I started with a story. I told them about a man who once managed a team of engineers, about how he was let go during an unannounced restructuring, about how he delivered pizza in the rain, sat alone outside a locked church, and learned to stand up again not through pride, but through the faith reflected in his son's eyes. I didn't name my old company. I didn't say who fired me. I just told the truth, without bitterness, without dramatization. I spoke as if reading a chapter from a book, one that was closed, but still worth learning from. The auditorium was quiet. No whispering, no ringing phones. I scanned the rows and finally, my eyes met Richard's again. This time he didn't look away. He looked at me, with an expression I couldn't put into words. No longer someone looking down from above, but like someone who had witnessed something unexpected. When I finished, applause rose, not overly long, but steady and decisive. I bowed, then walked off stage. I didn't look for Richard in the crowd. I didn't go over to shake hands or ask how he was. But as I turned for one last look, I saw him stand up, and he nodded, a very slight nod. Nobody else probably noticed, but I saw it, and I knew he knew too. Knew that I was no longer the man he'd pushed out of the company like a redundant number. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need an explanation. That nod was everything. It didn't erase the past, but it acknowledged the present. I left the auditorium before the networking reception began. I didn't want to stay. I didn't belong among the wine glasses and handshakes just to exchange business cards. I wanted to go home. Home to Ethan, to Laura, to a warm dinner, quiet laughter, and the gentle creak of the wooden crib by the window. Driving home, I turned on the radio. An old country song came on acoustic guitar, a low male voice, lyrics about a man who wasn't famous, wasn't rich, but had a family to live for. I smiled to myself in the car, not out loud, just a quiet smile, but a real one, because I knew today I had one. Not because I stood on a stage, not because I had a title, but because I hadn't sought revenge through bitterness. I had chosen to walk forward based on my own value. And in the end, that itself was the answer that made someone bow their head, not because I forced them to, but because they recognized the difference. Victory doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes, it's just a silent nod, and that's enough. That night, there was no moon. The small apartment was lit only by the soft glow of the nightlight in Ethan's room. Laura had gone to bed early, after a long day of work and childcare. She was always like that, never complaining, never demanding, just quietly doing the things that made me grateful every single day. I stood leaning against the doorframe, holding a warm mug of tea, steam rising faintly in front of my face. Before me was the small wooden crib, the one I'd fixed up myself months ago, during a sleepless night when my heart was still full of anxiety. Now, it stood sturdy, solid, creaking gently whenever Ethan stirred in his sleep. Ethan was sleeping, deeply, his mouth slightly pursed as if dreaming of milk. I looked at him, then sat down on the cushioned chair beside the crib, the place I often sat to tell him stories before he drifted off. But tonight, I wasn't planning on reading a fairy tale. Tonight, I wanted to tell him a true story. I leaned down, my voice soft as a whisper. You know, Ethan, Dad used to be someone who wasn't sure he was good enough to be a father. There were days Dad woke up and couldn't stand to look in the mirror. There were nights Dad came home without enough money for another pack of diapers. He slept on, breathing steady, his tiny hand resting on his chest, as if holding onto something very important. Dad used to think that to be a hero you had to be strong, tall, wear a cape, save the world. But then Dad realized, there are heroes no one ever sees. They don't get applause. Their names aren't called out. They just quietly do the small things, every single day, to keep someone else safe and sound. I set the tea mug down on the side table, rested my elbows on my knees, hands clasped together. My back ached slightly. My shoulders still held a dull soreness from the old days of hauling boxes. But I'd never felt stronger than I did right then. Dad delivered pizza in the rain, slipped and fell in front of a stranger's house, then quietly got back up. Dad sat outside a locked church thinking he was worthless. But you know what? Even then, God didn't let Dad break. I looked up at the ceiling. Silence. A tiny creak sounded, the wood settling, then quiet again. Dad doesn't have anything grand to tell you about when you grow up. Dad doesn't have prestigious degrees or medals or a large fortune to leave behind. But Dad has one thing he wants you to always remember. I stood up, leaned down very close, kissed Ethan lightly on the forehead, then whispered, "It's this. If one day you find yourself lost, feel like life has turned its back on you, then remember, as long as you love someone with all your heart, you are never a failure." I pulled the thin blanket up over him. He stirred slightly, then settled back into sleep as if nothing could possibly trouble him. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the light spilling from the hallway. As I turned to leave the room, I glanced back one last time, and in the dim light, I saw my own reflection in the mirror hanging on the opposite wall. No longer the man quietly bowing his head in the conference room. No longer the delivery guy soaked in rain with bleeding knees. No longer the person sitting before a cross, not knowing what to pray for. In the mirror was a father, an ordinary man, who had chosen not to give up. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to be called a hero. Some victories happen unseen. Some heroes never wear capes. They just persistently get back up day after day. Because of a child's eyes, because of a whispered word in the night, because of the belief that God doesn't abandon those who love enough. Daniel didn't seek revenge. He just chose to move forward, and justice, as it often does, arrived right on time, silent but profound. If you've been there, if you've fallen, hurt, endured in silence, leave a comment below the video sharing a piece of your story. If you see yourself in this story, subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together. And if you want to support this journey, a super thanks is a gentle way of saying, I believe in kindness too, because giving is sometimes the first step toward healing. And God, He always sees that.